Is it possible to commit the perfect crime? A house fire in Oregon came awfully close, until a microscopic clue on a piece of pipe told investigators what really happened. There's usually only one reason why people move to Gales Creek, Oregon.
Even though you're very close to Portland, you're within probably half an hour of Portland, you're out in the woods away from everybody. It's less populated. It's a chance to get away.
For Derek and Roxanne Doran, Gales Creek provided a much-needed refuge from their stressful careers in the computer industry.
When they bought that property in Gales Creek, that was more than my sister would have ever have dreamed of having. That was her dream come true.
And it also gave them enough room for Roxanne's horse farm.
She loved her horses. They were her balance in life, and she loved showing them. She loved spending time with them. That was her downtime and her stress relief, I'm sure.
After living there for several years, the Durans started construction on a 1,500 square foot addition, but they would never see it completed. Late one Sunday afternoon, neighbors saw a plume of smoke rising from the property.
The fire was actually reported by folks that lived more than a quarter-mile away. The house was not visible to any of the neighbors.
It took the volunteer fire department about 20 minutes to get there.
When we come up to a fire and it's fully involved, that means that we visually can see flames coming out of every opening, door, window. That usually means that it's been a period of time before we've gotten there.
Derek Duran returned home from grocery shopping, and when he saw Roxanne's car, he feared the worst.
Derek ran up towards the fire and dropped to his knees and screamed that he believed that his wife was inside.
Well, that's the worst thing that you can possibly hear, is that someone's inside. You still have the sense that you want to try to get in there and possibly see if they're alive.
It took almost 3 hours to bring the fire under control. When they did, they found Roxanne's charred remains.
The body had been burnt horrifically.
Her remains were little more than 35 pounds. They were so limited that the medical examiner was unable to determine the cause of death.
Since dental records were useless in making a positive identification, the medical examiner used DNA.
So what we did was take bone marrow material, submit it to the laboratory. They got some samples from the parents and proved her identity by DNA.
Roxanne Duran was only 34 years old.
From that moment on, you have a loss, and you're frightened and you're scared. But it just seemed from there, it went into a bad dream that just turned into a nightmare.
And that nightmare got worse when pieces of a handgun were discovered next to Roxanne's body. Fire investigators wanted to know what started the fire that killed Roxanne Duren. Roxanne's husband, Derek, had a possible explanation.
Derek said it had been a normal Sunday. They had awakened kind of late, and he had made breakfast for his wife. And it was just a lazy sort of day, but there were frozen pipes because of the weather.
To thaw the pipes, Derek said he turned on the clothes dryer in the basement and left its door open to heat the room, then left to buy groceries. The dryer, however, used propane gas.
Propane is pretty dangerous like that. It lays down in the low areas and get a lot of people get hurt from that.
As a matter of routine, police asked Derek for the store receipt to prove he was shopping, and he willingly complied.
There was a receipt that showed that he, in fact, had been at the store on the day in question.
But police were troubled by the scratch marks Derek had on his face.
His explanation was that he was clearing debris that had fallen during the ice storm across the road that led up to his residence. The explanation is in moving these branches that he scratched himself across the face.
The highly flammable propane gas clothes dryer was one possible cause of the fire. Another possibility focused on the garage, where investigators found that the battery cable in Roxanne's car was disconnected.
The car was brought up as a possible origin of the fire, that somehow a battery cable had caused a spark.
And the house was being remodeled, only the wall frames were up, which meant the fire could spread easily.
Forensic experts retained by the state to examine the vehicle found no indication that would suggest to them that there was any type of arcing that caused this fire to occur or start in the vehicle and then spread into the house.
But investigators thought the laundry room was the most likely source. And they found something unusual. Small pellet-like material near the clothes dryer.
It all seemed to be in a small little pile right near the origin of the fire.
At first, no one knew what this was or why it would be there.
I thought about this for about 3 days, and we had a cat at the time, and it wasn't until I had to change the kitty litter that I determined, hey, that's a type of kitty litter.
The Durens had cats, but their cat litter box was nowhere near the laundry room. Detective McKinney kept asking himself, why would cat litter be near the origin of the fire?
I went out and bought a bag of it and brought it back to my office and actually had it sitting in my cubicle and trying to figure out why that would be there.
As he pondered this, a fellow detective took notice of the cat litter in McKinney's office.
He walked by and asked me if I was going to start a fire. That detective worked burglary cases and really didn't know what kind of a case I was involved in. And I said, why would you ask me that?
The detective, a former Boy Scout, said soaking cat litter with gasoline was an old trick to help start campfires.
It was in an old Boy's Life magazine that he had learned about it.
A background check revealed Derek Duren was an Eagle Scout in his youth and might have known about this method of starting fires. But investigators found no clear evidence of arson. Arson dogs did not detect the presence of accelerants anywhere in the house. including in the burned cat litter. In terms of possible foul play, Derek and Roxanne had no known enemies, and by all accounts had a happy marriage. But the Durans owned a handgun, which was found near Roxanne's body. Police had to consider if this could have been suicide or murder. The handgun found next to Roxanne Duran's charred remains raised new questions about her death. The medical examiner x-rayed the remains, but the body was so badly burned it was impossible to find evidence of a gunshot wound. There was no ash or soot in Roxanne's lungs, and no carbon monoxide in her blood, which meant she was not breathing when the fire started.
This to me is a homicide. There's no other reasonable explanation as for why a healthy young woman is dead before a fire starts.
And there was blood in Roxanne's airway.
She had obviously died by some sort of violent means because she had aspirated blood. And from my past experience, people that aspirate blood means that there was some sort of horrific injury to their face or head, and their last breaths are taking in blood rather than air.
Roxanne Duran did not die in the fire, which means somebody caused her death.
But how had the fire started? Investigators turned to the propane-powered clothes dryer. Derek Duran said he thought the dryer started the fire because when he left the house, the dryer was running. But investigators discovered that the propane gas line into the dryer was disconnected. Had firefighters done this while extinguishing the blaze?
Firefighters are not concerned about destroying evidence. They're there to put the fire out and to save human life.
Since the disconnected hose had a threaded metal end, a forensic metallurgist found no evidence that firemen created the disconnection.
Because if the threads, once they lock in order for them to thread, they'd have to strip it to pull out. These threads did not show that characteristic.
Using a metallurgical microscope known as a metallograph, Bruce Wong saw evidence of oxidation on the threads.
What I see there tells me that this pipe was open at the time of the fire, that sufficiently open at the time of fire so that the deposit could occur.
Also on the pipe, Mr. Wong saw tiny brass beads sitting on top of the oxide on the threads of the metal fitting. This formed when the brass fixture melted and fell through the air, forming these tiny beads before landing on the fitting. This was further proof that the fitting was disconnected during the fire.
It indicated that the connection was open, which would indicate that the fire was deliberately set.
Derek told me that the dryer was running, and it couldn't have been running because it was not connected at the time. And that was a provable lie.
Fire investigators now made their official determination. The fire at the Duran house was arson.
And all of a sudden, everything starts making sense. And you fall into that area that you can actually follow what happens then. It makes sense, and you can forensically prove that.
But what was the motive? Roxanne's family revealed the couple argued about money, particularly the money Roxanne was spending on her horses.
They had a horse barn built, a riding arena. She was taking what's called cutting lessons for, I believe they cost $300 per lesson.
Investigators also learned that Derek's job was going to be transferred 150 miles away. That would mean selling their dream home and relocating, something Roxanne did not want to do.
I think that Roxanne said to him, Derek, you go rent an apartment or we'll buy you someplace up there and then you come back on weekends. I don't think my sister wanted to move. I think that she voiced that probably pretty clearly to him, and I don't think he liked it.
Investigators say Roxanne's defiance was too much for Derek. It was at variance with his vision of a perfect life and a perfect marriage.
In talking to friends, co-workers, everyone that I could possibly talk with, I could not establish a specific motive. I had my suspicions that it was probably because Roxanne was beginning to stand up for herself. According to her friends, she was starting to become more independent, which Derek would not like.
Derek wasn't going to get his way, and he was going to do whatever he had to do to get his way. And there was nobody that was going to stand in his way, and that included his wife.
When questioned by police, Derek denied setting the fire and claimed he would never have harmed his wife. Would this tiny spot on his jeans prove otherwise? The medical examiner ruled Roxanne Duran's manner of death as homicide, since she was dead before the fire started. What he didn't know, however, was the cause of death. But the fatal fire was determined to be arson, and Roxanne's husband, Derek, became a potential murder suspect. On the jeans he was wearing the day of the fire, investigators noticed a small spot.
I asked him specifically if it was blood, and he told me no, it was mud.
A phenolphthalein test proved Derek wrong. The spot was blood, and a subsequent DNA test proved it was Roxanne's blood. For police, this made perfect sense. They never believed Derek's explanation for the scratches on his face.
I know what the scratches from brush would look like, and this was not a scratch from brush mark. This appeared more to be fingernail scratches.
Derek Duran had lied about how this fire occurred, how the scratches on his face occurred, how the blood on his pants came to be there.
With proof of arson, his wife's blood on his clothing, and the apparent fingernail scratches on his face, Derek Duran was arrested and charged with arson and murder. But Derek was convinced he'd never spend a day in jail.
Derek Duran thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was sending emails to friends of his, co-workers at Intel, updating them on the trial as it was going along, talking about it in terms of being a chess match. and his view of how that chess game was going, and his expectation that he would be acquitted.
Prosecutors believe that Derek and Roxanne got into an argument on the afternoon of her death, an argument that turned violent.
I'd rather get rid of you first.
Blows were struck with enough force for Roxanne's blood to land on Derek's jeans. She tried to defend herself and scratched his face. Prosecutors believe he killed her, although they're not sure exactly how. Realizing he needed to cover up the crime, he decided to burn down the house. First, he went outside and turned off the propane gas, then disconnected the supply line to the dryer and set fire to the gas-soaked kitty litter. When he went back outside to open the propane valve, the gas would have produced a blowtorch effect, burning hotter than natural gas and immediately igniting the materials surrounding it. Prosecutors believe that Derek went shopping to establish an alibi, but not all of his time was accounted for.
There was a discrepancy in Derek Duren's timeline with respect to the receipts that he obtained at the various stores. He could account for about an hour to an hour and a half of his time, and it would appear that he would have had to have been gone well in excess of 2 hours based upon his initial comments of when he left and when he returned.
Since the fire almost completely consumed Roxanne's body, no one knows exactly how she died.
The jury was unable to make a determination on the charge of murder, unable to decide. They did not find Mr. Duren not guilty of murder. They simply said, we are unable to come to a decision.
As a result, Derek was only convicted of arson and first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Manslaughter in first degree is defined under Oregon law as recklessly causing the death of another human being under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life.
Did Derek think he could get away with this? Absolutely. Absolutely. Derek thought that he could be smarter than all of them. His ego was that big, and those people were beneath him.
Investigators say this case proves that no matter what someone does to cover his tracks, something always remains behind.
People do think when they start a fire that it's going to burn up everything and destroy all the evidence that they did it. And that's a fallacy that we like people to believe, because we can go back in as investigators and pretty well find out what caused the fire.
The fire in this case was so severe that it destroyed a lot of the type of evidence that you might normally find at a homicide scene. However, the fire itself creates evidence. And in this particular case, the fire itself and how it started and where it started became crucial evidence in the prosecution.
They always get caught in the end. Sometimes it takes a while, but they get caught.
This case was based almost exclusively on forensics, even though I like to think that I have something to do with it, but in actuality, in this case, it was forensics that found him guilty.